The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez walked toward the armory. Her boots crunched against the gravel path, each step measured and deliberate. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the finest marksmen in the Marine Corps, but today felt different. Something in the air seemed thick with tension, like the moments before a storm. Maria had been selected for the International Sniper Competition, a prestigious event that brought together the world's best military marksmen. For the United States Marine Corps, this wasn't just about individual glory. It was about proving their training methods and equipment superiority on a global stage. The competition would test every aspect of sniper skills: precision, patience, environmental adaptation, and mental fortitude. The other Marines in her unit watched her with a mixture of respect and something else she couldn't quite identify. Jealousy, perhaps, or resentment. Being the only woman selected for such a high-profile competition had painted a target on her back that she hadn't asked for but had learned to carry with pride. "Rodriguez," called out Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell from across the compound. His voice carried the sharp authority that made junior Marines snap to attention instantly. Maria turned, her expression neutral but alert. "Yes, Gunny. Equipment check in 15. Make sure your gear is squared away. The brass is watching this one closely." His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes held a warning she couldn't decipher. Maria nodded and continued toward the armory. Inside the climate-controlled building, rows of weapons stood in perfect formation. Her custom M40A6 sniper rifle waited in its designated slot, a precision instrument that had become an extension of her own body through countless hours of training and combat deployments. She had worked with the armorers for months to perfect the rifle's configuration. Every component had been carefully selected and adjusted. The Schmidt and Bender scope calibrated to her exact specifications. The trigger system tuned to break at precisely 2 pounds of pressure, the barrel that had proven its accuracy through thousands of rounds downrange. This wasn't just equipment. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of professional excellence. As Maria lifted the rifle from its rack, she immediately noticed something wrong. The weight fell off, just slightly, but enough to trigger her finely tuned instincts. She had handled this weapon so many times that even the smallest variation registered in her muscle memory like a discordant note in a familiar symphony. Setting the rifle on the inspection table, she began her methodical examination. The scope mounts appeared correct, but when she looked through the optics, the reticle seemed fuzzy around the edges. She adjusted the focus ring, but the clarity didn't improve as it should have. Someone had tampered with the scope's internal mechanisms. Moving to the trigger assembly, she dry-fired the weapon several times. The break point had changed. What should have been a crisp, clean release now felt mushy and unpredictable. The trigger group had been deliberately altered to introduce inconsistency that would throw off her shots at critical moments. Her heart rate remained steady, but her mind raced through the implications. This wasn't accidental wear or environmental damage. Someone had systematically sabotaged her rifle, introducing subtle flaws that would only become apparent under the stress of competition. The modifications were sophisticated enough to pass a casual inspection, but would fail catastrophically when precision mattered most. The armory door opened behind her, and she heard the familiar footsteps of Corporal Johnson and Lance Corporal Williams. Both were skilled marksmen who had competed for the same spot she now held. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed her examining her rifle. "Problem, Rodriguez?" Johnson's tone carried false concern that barely masked something darker underneath. "Just routine maintenance," she replied without looking up, continuing her inspection. The barrel crown showed subtle file marks that hadn't been there before. Someone had damaged the muzzle in a way that would affect bullet flight, but might be attributed to normal wear. Williams moved closer, his shadow falling across her workspace. "Shame if something was wrong with your gear right before the competition. Might need to find a replacement shooter." The threat was barely veiled, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maria felt the familiar calm that descended during combat situations. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing deepened, and her focus narrowed to laser intensity. She had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan and Iraq. A few insecure Marines didn't frighten her. "Won't be necessary," she said, finally, making eye contact. I'll have this sorted out. Over the next hour, she documented every instance of sabotage with the methodical precision that had made her an exceptional sniper. She photographed the damage, measured the deviations, and created a detailed report that would leave no doubt about the intentional nature of the tampering. But even as she worked, she knew that filing a complaint would likely result in delays that could cost her the competition slot. The sabotage was more than an attack on her equipment. It was an assault on everything she had worked to achieve. Some of her fellow Marines couldn't accept that a woman had earned the right to represent their corps on the international stage. They would rather see the unit fail than allow her to succeed. But they had underestimated her. Maria had grown up in a household where her father, a veteran machinist, had taught her that any problem with a mechanical solution could be overcome with patience, skill, and determination. She had rebuilt engines, fabricated parts, and repaired equipment that others had written off as beyond saving. As the afternoon sun slanted through the armory windows, she began the painstaking process of restoration. Each component would need to be disassembled, inspected, cleaned, and either repaired or replaced. The scope would require complete recalibration. The trigger mechanism needed to be rebuilt from scratch. The barrel crown would have to be recut with precision that demanded both steady hands and absolute focus. Word of her situation spread through the unit like wildfire. Some Marines offered help, genuinely outraged by the sabotage. Others watched from a distance, waiting to see if she would fold under the pressure. A few made comments about how maybe this was a sign that she wasn't cut out for the competition after all. Master Sergeant Thompson, the unit's senior NCO, appeared at her workstation as the day shift ended. He was a career Marine who had served in 3 wars and earned respect through competence rather than politics. His presence commanded attention without requiring words. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I heard about your equipment situation." "Roger, Master Sergeant. I'm handling it." He studied her work for several minutes, noting the systematic approach she was taking to the repairs. "You know, there are backup rifles available. Might be easier to start fresh." Maria looked up from the trigger assembly she was rebuilding. "With respect, Master Sergeant, this rifle, and I have history. It saved my life and taken enemy lives when it mattered. I'm not abandoning it because someone thought they could break us apart." Thompson nodded slowly. "That's what I hoped you'd say. But understand, if you're going to do this, it has to be perfect. One flawed component, and you'll be shooting blind when it counts." "I understand, Master Sergeant." "Good. You've got 48 hours before departure. The competition starts in 72 hours, and you need time to zero the rifle and confirm all systems are functioning correctly." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, whoever did this crossed a line that shouldn't exist in our corps. When you get back with that trophy, we'll be having some serious conversations about unit integrity." As Thompson walked away, Maria felt a surge of determination that went beyond personal ambition. She wasn't just fighting to restore her rifle. She was fighting for her place in an institution that claimed to value merit above all else, but sometimes struggled to live up to that ideal. The evening hours passed quietly as she worked under the bright workshop lights. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, each adjustment measured and verified. She had learned long ago that shortcuts in maintenance meant failures in the field, and she couldn't afford any failures now. The scope proved to be the most challenging repair. Someone had deliberately loosened the internal lens assembly, creating the optical distortion she had noticed. Realigning the elements required specialized tools and extreme patience. One wrong adjustment would render the scope useless, forcing her to start over with backup equipment that wouldn't have the same history of proven performance. As midnight approached, she finally achieved the clarity and precision the scope was designed to deliver. The reticle appeared sharp and true, the adjustment mechanisms responded smoothly, and the zero-stop feature functioned exactly as intended. It was a small victory, but an important one. The trigger mechanism demanded similar attention to detail. The saboteurs had introduced grit into the sear engagement surface, creating unpredictable release characteristics that would destroy shot consistency. Maria disassembled the entire fire control group, cleaned each component with solvent and ultrasonic baths, then reassembled everything to factory specifications. Testing the trigger with a force gauge confirmed her success. The brake weight was exactly where it needed to be, the take-up was smooth and consistent, and the reset was crisp and positive. Another system restored to fighting condition. The damaged barrel crown represented the greatest technical challenge. The saboteurs had used a file to create microscopic irregularities in the muzzle that would cause bullets to exit at slightly different angles, destroying accuracy at long range. Fixing this required cutting tools and techniques that pushed the limits of field maintenance capabilities. Working with a jeweler's precision, she used progressively finer abrasives to true the crown, measuring her progress with calipers accurate to thousandths of an inch. The work demanded absolute steadiness. One slip would ruin the barrel and force her to use backup equipment. Hours passed as she methodically removed material, checked her progress, and refined the surface until it met the standards that precision shooting demanded. Dawn was breaking over the base when she finally completed the restoration. Every component had been inspected, repaired, or replaced as necessary, and tested to confirm proper function. The rifle that emerged from her workshop was arguably in better condition than when it had first left the factory. But technical perfection was only part of the equation. She would need to re-zero the rifle, confirm its accuracy at multiple ranges, and verify that all the repairs had restored the weapon to its previous level of performance. Most importantly, she would need to rebuild the intimate familiarity that allowed her to place shots exactly where she intended, even under the stress of competition. As she secured the rifle in its case, Maria reflected on the night's work. The sabotage had been intended to break her spirit and force her out of the competition. Instead, it had reminded her why she had become a Marine in the first place, to overcome obstacles through skill, determination, and refusal to accept defeat. The competition would test her abilities against the world's best military marksmen. But tonight had tested something more fundamental: her commitment to excellence, and her refusal to be intimidated by those who feared her success. In many ways, this had been the most important victory she could achieve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she prepared to travel to the competition site. But tonight, she had proven to herself and anyone watching that Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez wasn't backing down from a fight. The Canadian Rockies stretched endlessly in all directions, their snow-capped peaks cutting sharp silhouettes against the morning sky. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stood at the edge of the competition range, breathing in the thin mountain air that would challenge every shooter's calculations over the next 5 days. The international sniper competition had drawn 43 teams from 26 nations, each representing the elite of their country's military marksmanship programs. She adjusted the shoulder strap of her rifle case and surveyed the other competitors gathering for the opening ceremony. Russians in their distinctive woodland camouflage, British SAS personnel who moved with predatory efficiency, German snipers whose equipment reflected their reputation for precision engineering, and teams from nations she had only read about in intelligence briefings. Each shooter carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from being selected as the best their military had to offer. The American team consisted of 4 Marines from different units, but Maria quickly realized she was the only woman among nearly 200 competitors. Curious glances followed her movement across the staging area, some respectful, others openly skeptical. She had learned to ignore such attention, focusing instead on the technical challenges ahead. Captain Brooks, the team leader, approached with their competition packets. He was a career officer who had earned his position through political skill as much as marksmanship ability. His relationship with Maria remained professionally cordial, but lacked the warmth he showed the male team members. Rodriguez, you're assigned to Lane 6 for the qualification round. The course of fire includes known distance shots from 300 to 1,200 meters, plus unknown distance targets that could be anywhere from 400 to 1,500 meters out. He handed her the range card showing target locations and environmental data. Roger, sir. Wind conditions? Variable. Mountain thermals will shift throughout the day, and there's a weather front moving in this afternoon. The range officers expect gusts up to 15 knots from multiple directions. Brooks paused, studying her expression. This isn't Camp Pendleton, Rodriguez. These conditions will expose any equipment problems or personal limitations? Maria nodded without response. She had spent the previous day zeroing her rifle and confirming that all repairs had restored its accuracy. The weapon now shot better than it ever had, but competition stress had a way of revealing flaws that practice couldn't predict. She would need every advantage her rebuilt rifle could provide. The qualification round began with known distance targets at 300 meters. Maria settled into her shooting position, adjusting her cheek weld and confirming her natural point of aim. Through her scope, the target appeared crisp and clear. The optical repairs had restored perfect clarity to the image. Her crosshairs settled on the center of the bullseye as she controlled her breathing and began the trigger press. The shot broke cleanly, recoil driving straight back into her shoulder without any lateral movement that would indicate problems with a muzzle crown repair. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round while maintaining sight picture. The target showed a perfect center hit, exactly where she had intended. 5 shots later, her 300-meter group measured less than 2 inches, well within competition standards. She moved back to the 600-meter line, where wind would begin to complicate her calculations. The morning air remained relatively stable, but she could see grass and flags beginning to flutter as thermal currents developed with the rising sun. Her shooting positions felt natural and stable, the rifle settling into her shoulder with familiar comfort. Each shot broke with identical precision, the trigger mechanism responding exactly as she had calibrated it during her midnight repair session. By the time she reached the 1,200-meter targets, she had established herself among the top shooters in the qualification round. The unknown distance phase proved more challenging. Competitors had to estimate range to targets placed at random distances, then engage them with a single shot. No second chances, no opportunity to correct for errors in judgment. This was where experience and instinct separated elite shooters from merely good ones. Maria studied her first unknown distance target through the rifle scope, a steel silhouette positioned somewhere between 600 and 1,000 meters away. She used the mil-dot reticle to estimate size and distance, cross-referenced her calculations with terrain features, and factored in the wind conditions she could observe through her optics. The target appeared to be approximately 850 meters away, positioned on a slight rise that would require a modest elevation adjustment. Wind flags showed a quartering breeze from the left at perhaps 8 knots, requiring her to hold slightly right of center. She made her adjustments, settled into her shooting position, and began her firing sequence. The bullet's flight time seemed endless in the thin mountain air. Through her scope, she saw the target react to impact, confirming a solid hit. Range officers confirmed the strike with electronic sensors, and she moved to the next firing position. By the end of the qualification round, Maria had placed 3rd overall among all competitors. The Chinese team's shooter held first place by a narrow margin, followed by a British SAS sergeant whose reputation preceded him. Her performance had silenced many of the skeptics and earned respectful nods from competitors who understood the technical difficulty of what they had all accomplished. That evening, the teams gathered in the competitor briefing room to learn about the elimination rounds that would follow. The competition would now shift from individual qualification to team-based challenges that would test not only shooting skills, but tactical decision-making, communication, and performance under stress. Tomorrow's scenario involves long-range target interdiction in support of a simulated military operation, announced the Canadian Rangemaster. Teams will be given intelligence packages describing threat locations and engagement priorities. You'll have limited ammunition and time constraints that will force tactical decisions about which targets to engage and which to ignore. He gestured to a topographical map showing the mountain terrain where the challenge would unfold. Target distances will range from 800 meters to potentially 2,500 meters, depending on the positions you choose to occupy. Environmental conditions will be challenging. We're expecting significant wind and the possibility of precipitation. Maria studied the terrain map, noting the elevation changes and potential shooting positions. The scenario would require balancing optimal shooting angles against concealment and mobility requirements. Teams that position themselves too aggressively might achieve better shots on distant targets, but risk exposure to simulated enemy forces patrolling the area. After the briefing, She found a quiet corner to clean and inspect her rifle. The day's shooting had confirmed that all repairs were holding up under competition stress, but she couldn't afford to become complacent. Long-range precision shooting demanded absolute reliability from every component, and tomorrow's challenges would push both equipment and shooter to their limits. Captain Brooks joined her as she worked through her maintenance routine. Good shooting today, Rodriguez. But tomorrow's going to separate the contenders from the pretenders. The teams that make it through the elimination rounds will face challenges that most of these shooters have never attempted. What kind of challenges, sir? Extreme long range. Moving targets. Multiple simultaneous engagements. The kind of shots that can't be taught in any school. They have to be developed through experience and natural ability. He watched her reassemble the bolt carrier group with practiced efficiency. The question is whether you're ready for that level of performance. Maria looked up from her rifle, meeting his gaze directly. I guess we'll find out tomorrow, sir. The next morning brought the weather front that meteorologists had predicted. Gray clouds hung low over the mountain peaks, and intermittent rain showers swept across the competition range. Wind conditions were gusty and unpredictable, shifting direction and intensity without warning. These were the conditions that would challenge every aspect of marksmanship skill and equipment reliability. The American team moved to their assigned sector, a ridge line overlooking a valley where targets would appear at various locations throughout the day. Maria selected a shooting position that offered good visibility across multiple target zones while providing natural concealment behind rock formations and alpine vegetation. She established her firing position with methodical care, using her pack and bipod to create a stable platform that could accommodate shooting at various angles and elevations. The rifle settled naturally into her shoulder, its familiar weight and balance providing confidence even as wind gusts tugged at her clothing and equipment. The first target appeared at approximately 1,200 meters, a vehicle silhouette positioned on a distant ridge. Through her scope, she could see other teams engaging the same target, their muzzle flashes visible despite the overcast conditions. She calculated wind conditions, adjusted for the elevation difference, and prepared to fire. But, as she settled behind her rifle, she noticed something that other shooters had missed. The target's position relative to terrain features suggested it was actually closer than it appeared, perhaps 1,000 meters instead of 1,200. The visual illusion was created by the mountainous terrain and atmospheric conditions that made distance estimation particularly challenging. She adjusted her scope settings accordingly and fired. The target reacted immediately, confirming a center hit, while many other teams were still adjusting their aim based on incorrect range estimates. Her corrected calculation had given her an advantage that demonstrated the value of careful observation over quick assumptions. Throughout the morning, targets appeared at various locations and distances. Some were stationary presentations that allowed careful aim. Others moved across the terrain in ways that required lead calculations and perfect timing. Maria's rebuilt rifle performed flawlessly, each shot breaking cleanly and striking where she intended. The most challenging engagement came just after noon, when a target appeared at what the range officers later confirmed was 1,847 meters. At that distance, bullet flight time exceeded 2 seconds, and atmospheric conditions became critical factors in accuracy. A slight error in wind reading or elevation adjustment would result in a complete miss. Maria studied the target through her rifle scope, noting every environmental clue she could observe. Grass movement indicated wind patterns, thermal distortions showed air density variations, and the target's appearance through the optics revealed atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet flight. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and prepared for the longest shot she had ever attempted in competition. The rifle recoiled smoothly, and she maintained sight picture to observe bullet impact. After what seemed like an eternity, the target reacted to a solid hit. Radio confirmation from the range officers verified that she had achieved a first-round impact at a distance that challenged the capabilities of both her equipment and personal skill. By the end of the elimination round, only 12 teams remained in contention. The American team had qualified for the final day of competition, with Maria's long-range performance being a crucial factor in their advancement. Her rebuilt rifle had proven itself under the most demanding conditions, vindicating every hour she had spent on its restoration. That evening, she received an unexpected visitor at her quarters. Master Sergeant Thompson had traveled from Camp Pendleton to observe the final day of competition, bringing with him news from the investigation into the equipment sabotage. "Rodriguez, we need to talk," he said quietly, gesturing toward a private area away from other team members. They walked to a picnic table overlooking the valley where tomorrow's final challenges would unfold. The mountain air was crisp and clear, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Thompson sat across from her, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "The investigation found evidence that confirms your suspicions about the sabotage," he began. "Fingerprints, video surveillance, testimony from Marines who witnessed the planning. We have enough to pursue court-martial proceedings against the responsible parties." Maria felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. She had hoped the evidence might prove her wrong, that the damage to her rifle had been accidental or the result of negligent maintenance rather than deliberate sabotage by fellow Marines. "How many were involved, Master Sergeant?" "4 Marines, including one NCO who should have known better. They're being processed for charges that include destruction of government property, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, and conspiracy. The penalties could include reduction in rank, forfeit of pay, and discharge from the Corps." She absorbed this information quietly, watching the stars emerge more clearly as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. The men who had tried to destroy her career were now facing the destruction of their own military futures. There was justice in that outcome, but it brought her no satisfaction. "There's something else," Thompson continued. "The Commandant himself has been following your performance here. Your response to the sabotage and your results in this competition have impressed people at the highest levels of the Corps. There may be opportunities coming your way that we haven't discussed yet." "What kind of opportunities, Master Sergeant?" "Advanced training programs. Special assignments that would utilize your demonstrated abilities. Positions where you could influence how the Corps develops and trains its precision marksmen." He stood to leave, then paused. "But first, you need to finish what you started here. Tomorrow's final round will determine whether you're just a good Marine who overcame adversity or an exceptional Marine who can perform at the highest levels when everything depends on it." As Thompson walked away, Maria remained at the table, contemplating the challenges that awaited her. The final day of competition would feature the most difficult shots in military marksmanship, tested under conditions designed to identify the world's best military precision shooters. Her rifle was ready, her skills were proven, and her determination was stronger than ever. But success would require more than technical competence and mental toughness. It would demand the kind of performance that separated legendary shooters from merely excellent ones, the ability to achieve perfection when perfection was the only acceptable standard. The final morning dawned clear and still, with visibility that stretched for miles across the Canadian wilderness. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stood at the edge of what the competition organizers called the ultimate challenge, a shooting scenario that would test the absolute limits of military marksmanship capability. Only 6 teams remained after 3 days of elimination rounds, representing the pinnacle of precision shooting from their respective nations. The range master briefed the final competitors on a scenario that seemed almost impossible. "Your mission is to engage a series of targets at extreme long range, simulating the interdiction of high-value threats that cannot be approached through conventional means. Target distances will exceed anything you've encountered in previous rounds, with environmental conditions that will challenge both your equipment and your ability to calculate complex ballistic solutions." He gestured toward the valley spreading below their mountain position, where targets had been placed at distances that pushed the boundaries of rifle capability. The final target, if any team chooses to engage it, is positioned at 4,524 meters. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 3 miles away, at an elevation difference of over 400 meters. No military sniper has ever successfully engaged a target at that distance in competition conditions. The briefing continued with environmental data that made the challenge even more daunting. Wind conditions would vary significantly across the extended range, with different velocities and directions at various elevations and terrain features. Atmospheric pressure changes throughout the day would affect bullet flight characteristics, and the extreme distance meant that small errors in calculation would result in misses measured in meters rather than inches. Maria studied the range cards and ballistic data with careful attention to detail. Her rebuilt rifle had performed flawlessly throughout the competition, but this final challenge would demand performance beyond anything she had ever attempted. The 4,524-meter target represented a shot at the very edge of theoretical possibility, requiring perfect conditions, flawless equipment, and calculations that accounted for factors most shooters never encountered. Captain Brooks approached as she reviewed her equipment one final time. "Rodriguez, I need to be clear about expectations for today. The mandatory targets are all within 2,000 meters, challenging but achievable with your demonstrated skills. The extreme long-range targets are optional. Attempting them risks wasting ammunition and time that might be better spent on guaranteed points from closer engagements." "Understood, sir." She continued her equipment inspection, checking every component that would affect accuracy at extreme range. The scope's tracking mechanisms, the rifle's bedding system, the ammunition that had been specially selected for consistency. Every element had to function perfectly for success at such distances. The Chinese and British teams are focusing on achieving perfect scores on the mandatory targets. That's probably the smart tactical decision. Brooks paused, watching her methodical preparation. But if anyone on this team has the capability to attempt the impossible shots, it would be you. The decision is yours to make. As the competition began, Maria moved through the mandatory target sequence with mechanical precision. Each shot was calculated and executed with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized her performance throughout the week. Her rebuilt rifle responded exactly as she intended, placing shots in the center of targets at distances from 800 to 1,800 meters. But her attention kept returning to the most distant target, a steel silhouette positioned on a ridge so far away that it appeared as a tiny speck even through her powerful scope. The range officers had confirmed the distance at 4,524 meters, nearly twice as far as the longest confirmed military sniper kill in combat history. Attempting such a shot wasn't just ambitious, it bordered on impossible. She completed the mandatory course of fire with a perfect score, placing herself among the top 3 competitors. The Chinese team's shooter had also achieved perfection on the required targets, while the British team had missed one shot, but compensated with exceptional performance on intermediate-range challenges. The competition was close enough that bonus points from extreme-range targets could determine the final standings. With her required shooting complete, Maria had earned the right to attempt the optional long-range challenges. 3 targets were available at distances of 2,847 meters, 3,425 meters, and the ultimate challenge at 4,524 meters. Each successful engagement would earn significant bonus points, but failed attempts would cost valuable ammunition and time that couldn't be recovered. She decided to work systematically through the long-range sequence, treating each shot as preparation for the next. The 2,847-meter target required calculations that pushed beyond normal ballistic tables, accounting for air density variations, Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation, and wind patterns that changed significantly over the extended bullet flight path. Settling behind her rifle, she began the complex process of range estimation and environmental assessment that extreme-range shooting demanded. Her scope's mil-dot reticle allowed precise measurement of target size and distance confirmation, while careful observation of grass movement, mirage patterns, and atmospheric conditions revealed wind patterns across the entire engagement zone. The shot required holding approximately 8 feet above the target to compensate for bullet drop, with additional adjustments for wind drift that would affect the projectile throughout its nearly 6-second flight time. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope settings, and settled into her shooting position with absolute concentration. The rifle recoiled smoothly, and she maintained sight picture to observe the bullet's impact. After what seemed like an eternity, dust erupted near the target, indicating a near miss that passed just to the left of the silhouette. The environmental conditions had changed slightly during her preparation, and her wind calculation had been fractionally incorrect. Rather than being discouraged, Maria felt encouraged by how close she had come. The miss revealed information about atmospheric conditions that would improve her calculations for subsequent shots. She adjusted her wind estimates and moved to the 3,425-meter target, applying the lessons learned from her first attempt. This time, her calculations proved accurate. The target reacted to impact after a flight time that tested her patience and nerve, confirming a solid hit at a distance that exceeded the capabilities of most military marksmen. The success validated her ballistic calculations and demonstrated that her rebuilt rifle could perform at the extreme ranges that defined elite precision shooting. Now only the ultimate challenge remained, the 4,524-meter target that no military sniper had ever engaged successfully in competition. The distance was so extreme that atmospheric conditions, equipment limitations, and human skill factors all combined to create a shot at the very edge of possibility. Maria studied the target through her scope, noting every detail that might affect bullet flight over the extended range. The elevation difference was significant, requiring holdover that exceeded her scope's adjustment range and demanded precise calculation of gravitational effects on projectile trajectory. Wind patterns varied across multiple terrain features, creating complex deflection requirements that changed throughout the bullet's flight path. The atmospheric conditions were as perfect as they were likely to become: minimal wind, stable air temperature, and clear visibility that would allow her to observe bullet impact. If she was going to attempt this shot, the current moment represented her best opportunity for success. She began her final sequence of calculations, using every tool and technique she had developed throughout her military career. The ballistic computer provided baseline data, but extreme-range shooting required intuitive adjustments based on environmental factors that no algorithm could fully predict. She measured wind conditions at multiple points along the bullet's path, estimated air density variations across the elevation changes, and calculated holdover requirements that pushed beyond normal shooting parameters. The scope adjustment required for this shot exceeded her equipment's mechanical range, forcing her to use holdover techniques that demanded perfect sight picture and unwavering concentration. She would need to place her crosshairs approximately 12 feet above the target, maintaining that precise aim point while controlling her breathing and executing a perfect trigger press. As she settled behind the rifle for her final shot, Maria felt the familiar calm that descended during critical moments. The world narrowed to the essential elements: her crosshairs, her breathing, the trigger's breakpoint, and the distant target that represented the ultimate test of her skills and equipment. The rebuilt rifle felt solid and familiar in her hands, every component functioning exactly as she had restored it during those midnight hours at Camp Pendleton. The scope provided crystal-clear optics, the trigger broke with perfect precision, and the barrel that had been damaged by sabotage now delivered accuracy that exceeded its original specifications. She began her trigger press with glacial slowness, maintaining perfect sight picture while her crosshairs held steady on the calculated aim point. The rifle recoiled smoothly into her shoulder, and she maintained her position to observe impact while the bullet began its long journey across the Canadian wilderness. The flight time at such extreme range tested her patience and concentration. She counted the seconds while maintaining sight picture, waiting for any indication of bullet impact that would confirm success or failure. Other competitors and range officials watched through spotting scopes, equally invested in witnessing whether military marksmanship history would be made. After nearly 8 seconds that felt like an eternity, the distant target reacted to impact with a metallic ring that carried across the mountain air. Range officials confirmed the hit with electronic sensors, and the assembled observers erupted in applause that acknowledged a feat of shooting that redefined what was considered possible in military precision marksmanship. Maria lowered her rifle and sat back from her shooting position, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. The shot that had seemed almost impossible had been achieved through a combination of technical skill, equipment that had been rebuilt from sabotage, and determination that refused to accept limitations that others considered absolute. The final competition scores confirmed what everyone had witnessed: her successful engagement of all long-range targets, culminating in the record-breaking 4,524-meter shot, had earned enough bonus points to secure first place overall. She had not only won the international sniper competition, but had done so while establishing a new standard for military marksmanship capability. Captain Brooks approached as she secured her rifle for the final time, his expression mixing professional pride with personal amazement. Rodriguez, what you just accomplished will be talked about in sniper schools for decades. That wasn't just an exceptional shot. It was a redefinition of what's possible in this field. Thank you, sir. But I couldn't have done it without the rifle performing exactly as designed. Every repair had to be perfect for success at that range. The awards ceremony that evening brought together competitors and officials who had witnessed something unprecedented in military marksmanship. As Maria accepted the trophy for overall competition victory, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the discovery of sabotage through the midnight hours of repair work to this ultimate validation of her skills and determination. The Canadian competition director presented her with a special recognition beyond the normal awards. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your 4,524-meter engagement represents the longest confirmed hit in military competition history. This achievement will be officially recognized in the record books and will stand as a benchmark for future competitors to aspire toward. Master Sergeant Thompson watched from the audience, his weathered face showing the pride that comes from seeing a Marine overcome every obstacle to achieve excellence. The investigation into the equipment sabotage had concluded with appropriate punishments for those responsible, but their actions had ultimately resulted in creating a legendary performance rather than preventing one. As the ceremony concluded, Maria found herself surrounded by competitors from other nations who wanted to understand the technical aspects of her record-breaking shot. Russian snipers asked about her ballistic calculations, German marksmen inquired about her equipment specifications, and British shooters sought insights into her training methods that had enabled such extraordinary performance. She answered their questions with the professional courtesy that characterized elite military personnel, sharing technical knowledge while building the international relationships that were one of the competition's intended outcomes. Her achievement had earned respect that transcended national boundaries and established her reputation among the global community of precision marksmen. The flight home to California provided time for reflection on everything that had occurred. The sabotage that had seemed like a career-threatening crisis had instead become the catalyst for a performance that exceeded her own expectations. The rebuilt rifle that emerged from those midnight repair sessions had proven capable of accuracy that surpassed its original specifications. But, more importantly, the experience had demonstrated that excellence could emerge from adversity when confronted with skill, determination, and refusal to accept defeat. The Marines who had attempted to sabotage her success had unknowingly created the circumstances that led to a historic achievement in military marksmanship. Upon returning to Camp Pendleton, Maria found that word of her competition victory had preceded her arrival. The unit that had contained both saboteurs and supporters now united in recognition of an accomplishment that brought honor to the entire Marine Corps. Her rebuilt rifle was displayed in the unit's trophy case alongside the competition awards, serving as a reminder that excellence could overcome any obstacle. The opportunities that Master Sergeant Thompson had mentioned became reality in the weeks following her return. Advanced training assignments, instructor positions at elite military schools, and special programs that would allow her to influence the development of future precision marksmen all became available as a result of her proven capabilities. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the message her success sent to other female Marines who faced their own challenges in proving themselves worthy of opportunities traditionally reserved for men. Her achievement demonstrated that merit, skill, and determination could overcome prejudice and sabotage to reach heights that redefined what was considered possible. The rifle that had been sabotaged and rebuilt now held a place of honor, its restoration representing more than technical repair work. It symbolized the principle that excellence could emerge from adversity when confronted with the right combination of skill, determination, and refusal to accept limitations that others considered absolute. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had not only won the international sniper competition and set a new record for military marksmanship. She had proven that sabotage could become the foundation for legendary achievement when met with the qualities that define the finest Marines in the Corps.